First Coast's most accurate forecast from the First Coast News Weather Team, certified by Weather Rate, sponsored by AC Designs.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Katie Jeffries. I'm joined here by Tim Deegan as well. We're going to talk about your traffic situation and, of course, the weather. And Tim's going to be taking some of your questions. So if you have questions, make sure you are leaving those questions in the comments for him. So before we get to Tim, let's talk about the situation on the roadways. So starting out, looking at the issue with ice. If you live north of I-10, especially those of you towards Georgia, could definitely still see some ice on your roadways. And refreeze later tonight could be something of a concern on our roads. I'm sure Tim will talk more about that as well. Now, Clay, St. John's, and Putnam, it's wet in your area, but I have not seen any reports of ice. Now, one of the big issues that we are following right now, the closure of 3 bridges through the downtown area. That would be the Matthews Bridge, that's the big red bridge, the Hart Bridge, that's the big green bridge, and then the Main Street Bridge, the blue drawbridge downtown. It's a combination, according to JSO, of weather and crashes that have led to the closure of those 3 bridges. So the bridges that are still open for you to be able to use would be the Acosta and the Fuller Warren at this point. The Fuller Warren being kind of like the I-95 bridge. So keep that in mind. If you do have to travel to downtown, your only 2 options to get across the St. John's in the downtown area right now would be the Acosta and the Fuller Warren. Now, the Buckman Bridge and the Dames Point Bridge for right now are open. Have not seen any reports of crashes on those currently, but of course all bridges around the Jacksonville area are being monitored at this point. Another issue we want to make you aware of is up towards the Nassau County area. Or actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to get to that in a second. Want to let you know in Nassau County, the Shave Bridge actually is open, but you need a deputy escort to go across it. So deputies are there kind of escorting people across to make sure that they are using reduced speed while going across that bridge. So that is the Shave Bridge that goes into or out of the Fernandina Beach area. Sticking with the Nassau County area, 95 northbound, it looks like northbound and southbound now is closed basically from State Road 200 to the state line, and that's because of ice. We had issues in this section of roadway throughout the morning. Currently, there is a crash very close to the state line involving 2 semis. Looks like they slid on ice. They're both jackknifed, and after that occurred, the decision was made to close this section of roadway. So traffic right now is being routed off at State Road 200 over towards 17. That crash I was telling you about with the semis, again, close to the state line there. And that kind of sparked this closure of 95. It looks like northbound and southbound, that section there just south of the state line. So something we are continuing to follow very closely. Going into the Georgia area, Brunswick, dealing with power outages, icy roads, snow. For right now, have not seen any reports of the Sidney Lanier Bridge being closed, but you can see by this map, a lot of red, yellow. So if people are crossing it, they're doing so very slowly. So please be cautious out there. And with power outages, you could definitely have traffic traffic lights out. So remember to treat intersections like a four-way stop. And it could be hard for cars to be able to stop. There's probably going to be a lot of sliding. So keep that in mind. If you are driving, take it easy so that way you don't find yourself sliding through that intersection. Out towards Waycross, a lot of ice as well. Our team on the ground there, Robert Speda, along with Lee Southwick, showed us some of the ice that they were seeing on vehicles and on the roadways. So you can see very slow around the Waycross area as well. So watching the conditions for you. If you're traveling around Georgia, it's going to be slow. It's going to be slippery. I definitely advise staying home if you can. It's not, I wouldn't say the time to go up and check it out with the kiddos. You don't want to load them in the car. If you are in a crash, you could be stuck for a while before anybody's able to get you because we do have so many crashes on the roadway. So we'll keep you updated with the Jacksonville bridges in the downtown area. I know that's a major concern for people. Frankly, and I'll bring in Tim, I've never seen 3 bridges at once closed. Even through a hurricane, we've never seen this many bridges close at once. So it is something that we will follow very closely because we know it impacts a lot of people.
Yeah, it's not as bad as 1989, but I would have to go all the way back to 1989 to think of when all the bridges were closed. So hopefully that won't stay closed for too much longer, but still temperatures are probably going to be at or below freezing, maybe for another 1 to 2 hours. Katie, thanks for all your updates. Katie has been very specific, which is extremely helpful for those of us that do have to be out and about. Lou's going to join us in just a moment, folks, and we're going to not only talk about the forecast, but Lou's going to answer some of your questions. So I want to show some graphics and then go to the forecast. And I'm just going to repeat here what Katie mentioned and maybe help you plan. So she's mentioned that the Main Street, the Hart, and the Matthews Bridge are closed. The Hart and the Matthews, of course, are higher bridges. Notice I have yellow over the Acosta and the Danes Point. Now, they're not closed at the present time, but those are higher bridges, meaning they're higher above the warmer St. John's. So although the warmer St. John's does help the delay of those bridges freezing over or getting patches, here's another way I'm trying to say. If you have to be out and about, and if the Acosta and the Danes Point are normally your sources, I would go for an alternative. That way, at least you're not suddenly surprised that, oh my, they've closed these other bridges, or you get up there and it's a dangerous situation. So if the Acosta and the Danes Point are normally where and when you would go over the next couple of hours, why not go over the Fuller Warren or the Buckman? They're lower. They are fine now, as we heard from Katie, and they should be okay. I guess, Katie, you haven't heard anything as far as northbound 95.
Only in Nassau County. I've heard of issues with that. But I mean, is how
long it might stay closed?
No, unfortunately not. We have not. I mean, that crash happened around, I'd say, 8 o'clock this morning. But after that occurred, they started getting more reports of ice. So that's why it's closed at the moment. No word yet on when it will reopen. Now, Lou Turner was going to jump in, but he said he had a question that someone wrote in.
From
Sure.
Lori. Lori's asking, is it safe to drive on Bay Meadows Road, Katie?
Is it safe to drive on Bay Meadows Road? Well, it's hard to say. I've not heard of any closures along Bay Meadows Road, but you really want to be cautious. Black ice, of course, is going to be a concern, and you never know what other drivers are going to do. So right now, I have not heard of any closures along Bay Meadows. I haven't heard of any specific reports of ice along Bay Meadows, but if you are leaving the house really anywhere at any point today and you are in Duval North, I ask that you use caution. Please be careful.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Current conditions would indicate Bay Meadows just above freezing.
Okay, good.
So probably, in pretty good shape if you have to. Basically, the farther south and the more the roads are just, as you know, Katie, on the ground from Duval south, they're probably in pretty good shape. But as Katie mentioned, I wanted to show the 7-day outlook. Yes, for those of you that just want hope, yes, milder and then warmer weather's coming. But notice what happens right on through Saturday morning. So Thursday morning, Friday morning, Saturday morning, temperatures will drop down to near to freezing. And in fact, it could be a hard freeze for those of you north and west of Jacksonville. And that is where more than likely, at least in some spots, there will still be water laying around or snow and slush melting, sitting there until it freezes again. So even though the main precipitation event is over, as we go overnight tonight, and overnight Thursday night, and even overnight Friday night, especially heading up toward and into Brunswick, up toward Waycross, just be aware that overnight, those roads that will probably become passable during the day today, at least there could be some patchy ice. So I would say really through Saturday morning, especially north from Nassau County north or Baker County west, that if you don't have to drive overnight or into the early morning hours, I would say try not to. Now, this is another reason why the weather impact we have going until 1. All significant precipitation has ended. It's going to be about another hour or two before temperatures go above freezing for most areas, and maybe until 1. So really that's more because the roads that are icy now will probably take until 1, maybe longer in a few locations. We'll be talking to Lou about that in a bit. So here's a look at the current conditions. And yes, if you're up early with Lou, and Lou's been here since 1 in the morning, it's actually colder in some locations now than it was earlier as our winds became more north and northwesterly, that is out of the north and northwest. That means they're not really blowing down the estuary, and so those temperatures did drop. As far as the dew point, that's another thing that Lou and I can talk about. So the dew points have actually continued to drop. Notice Notice Lou, we'll hear from Lee later, that around Mayport and St. Augustine, their dew points are now below freezing. So maybe we can talk a little bit about evaporative cooling, folks. So remember, the dew point, the lower the dew point is below the temperature, the drier the air is. But that also means that the air potentially could cool down to that level.
Right.
And so as the wind blows over wet roads and the dew point's lower, amazingly, especially if we don't have sun, those temperatures can still drop a little bit. So I think that's why we're still supporting the idea of the weather impact through at least 1 o'clock, right, Lou?
100%. The 1 o'clock sort of nomenclature and timing was it's really timing it up with that winter storm warning that had been in place. And but I do worry. I think impactful. Up and down 95 especially. But I'm looking at thinking about Glenn County. The causeways, the bridges, the roads there. It'll be. I mean, it could be tomorrow, really, or Friday before it's like, I feel good getting out about, because what's happening in there, and I'm getting, texts from friends, folks I know on St. Simons in Brunswick, you get that ice forming on those tree branches, and that's not going to really thaw anytime soon, really extensively anytime soon. So if it refreezes, you're going to have weight on those tree branches and causing problems. I did have if I wanted to pop some questions here on the stream, and feel free to ask. We're watching. I'm watching the questions specifically on the Facebook side of the stream. So just an FYI there. But Stephanie had asked, we're in Baldwin. Wanted to see some snow. Are there any accumulations in Jacksonville? So no. That's
easy. At least we have an easy answer.
Yeah.
In Jacksonville, no.
Do you want to? Okay, no. So no. And where there are accumulations, like Waycross, I wouldn't necessarily, Stephanie, say if you're coming from Baldwin, probably not the best idea to hop on the highway right now and go up there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I know the kids probably desperately want to see
100%.
it, but yeah, that's probably not worthwhile. Maybe a lesson learned that I do know some folks who wanted their kids to see it, and on Saturday actually made reservations in places like Waycross. Now that can get kind of costly, but
sure.
But still, that's a safer way to do it, right? Get up there before the ice and snow come down, and then
I think just take a lesson from what we just talked about with Katie in the traffic report is, we're already seeing a lot of collisions, a lot of incidents on the roads, even on 95, on the big highways. So your way up to Waycross does not involve a lot of the big highways. It's involving a lot of county roads and secondary roads. So I wouldn't be overly excited about that, but that's where the accumulation really is. Susan reported they had flurries on the west side. We heard about flurries, west side.
In fact, I was showing that radar.
Yeah.
You can see the radar for a little bit because we've been watching this final area, so to speak, and you can kind of, if you wanted to, connect the dots from a little bit of precipitation offshore, maybe down toward Duval, maybe northern St. Johns County, but I think especially, Lou, like downtown, we've even seen a few glimpses of blue. I would probably think that even chance of seeing a flake is pretty much starting to come to
an end. Yeah. That and now the event turns to temperatures, which you've already talked about a good bit. But you do think the refreeze tonight, and then I mean even wind chills right now up in some of the Golden Isles, coastal Georgia, we've seen in the teens. So it's already. I mean, just because this snow and precipitation events ended and more or less moved offshore. The impacts remain with those wind chills. And that's certainly one of our thresholds. When we talk about weather impact alert and issuing that for our area, it is certainly about, widespread rain or precipitation canceling your plans, becoming inconvenient. But we also got to keep in mind those wind chills that become dangerous.
And it's one thing, for instance, down here in Duval and elsewhere where we have power.
Right.
But especially for those folks in Glenn County, you get wind chill, you don't have power. So maybe if you're young, if you're single, if you have some independence, not a bad idea. If you know your neighborhood is without power, maybe check in on your neighbors for maybe people who aren't as independent, maybe have too many kids to be out and about. Maybe you're elderly, just to make sure that they're okay and or they're heating their home in a safe way. Because, if you're without power, those temperatures in your home are dropping pretty fast in Glenn County and a few other spots. I did want to show this computer model, and where you see land on this map, that means the forecast is for the clouds to break up. And we've seen some sun coming in, but I don't want to give too much hope because, and Lou's been talking about this earlier, that it looks like what's happening is that although much drier air from about 5,000 feet up has moved in. That's why the precipitation field has ended. Below 5,000 feet, the air is still just about saturated. And if you look at those arrows, they're a little tough to see, but notice as we get later in the morning through midday, they start to blow out of the northeast. And what that means is we're just not getting drier air coming in. And it looks like those clouds are probably going to fill in again. Now, maybe, just maybe, where the snow and ice has been most, that Waycross and maybe into Glenn County that'll get a little sunshine through midday. But then notice what happens. Not only do we head towards sunset and we lose the sun, but then the clouds come back again. And then much of tomorrow we could be socked in. I'm not looking for any frozen precipitation, but a cold, damp scenario. So gosh, I really hope, Lou, that those people who don't have power get it, because we're not going to probably have solar radiation to help us out until maybe Friday.
And the trouble you're going to run into, the crews are going to run into, is that you really can't get much work done on a frozen power line. I mean, any crew members out there and linemen out there who want to correct me, love to hear it. I imagine that's got to be really, really tough. I have a question, and anytime I get to spend time with Tim Deegan, I like to learn as much as I can because I've gotten the big picture question of, I'd mentioned my analogy of getting snow in Northeast Florida. It's so hard to do. You have to have all the ingredients kind of lined up perfectly. Almost, if you play Yahtzee, and I say it over and over again, and probably people are probably getting tired of me saying it on the stream, but it's like rolling a Yahtzee, all sixes, first roll. You got to get the perfect scenario kind of lined up. You don't get a second chance. It has to be perfect, because by the time the system's gone, because our typical the coldest typical nights for us are really bone dry and crystal clear, generally speaking. So the big picture question I've been getting, why? What happened? What lined up? What were those ingredients, Tim? Talking about Canadian air, really, really cold air, coupling in with what came out of the Gulf of Mexico. So, your thoughts? Yeah,
it is like you said, that typically for us to get a freeze, we have to have clear skies. And the reason for that is the bit of warmth we've had on the surface, of course, has to radiate out. Well, when we have cloudy skies, that can't happen. But the other side of that coin of under those clear skies, it has to radiate out. Typically, on those mornings that we then call a freeze, very often at 5,000 feet, it's actually above freezing. Right. In other words, during the majority of the time that we have freezes here on the First Coast, on the surface, it's not cold enough to snow or produce sleet.
Right.
And then when we do have if we do have the clouds, as cold as it may be, we can't have the radiational cooling, so it doesn't drop at the surface. So yes, we have to have the jet stream much farther south than normal, but still situated to where we have moisture, and that's a very unusual situation. Now, although this was not a 1989 event, but I can say what's similar to what happened, especially let's say from Lake Charles to Pensacola. Anybody would call that a snowstorm. In fact, officially in the Bayou country, they were able to call it a blizzard. The reason I'm looking over the camera, folks, is because Lou's right there.
We're making eye contact.
If it doesn't make sense to you what I'm doing here. But there's something called a Greenland block, and that is essentially, and this happened last week, and there were some areas of Greenland actually having record heat But as far as the reason that's significant for the jet stream, if you can picture that, typically, folks, the jet stream, it may move northwest to southeast, southwest to northeast, but it typically moves from west to east. But how do we get it so far south to where we can have both moisture and snow? Well, if you can kind of picture Canada, and if there's something called a Greenland block, which means there's really warm air there up to about 30,000 feet, it can't go east. It can't go into Greenland. And so where is it forced? South. And that's what's happened hemispherically. There was a Greenland block, and therefore, if you have just enough of those surges in the jet stream, right, then occasionally they may combine with subtropical jet stream. And I'm going to leave with this, Lou.
Yes.
Just because we talked about this last week, we were wondering what was going to happen, and the models were amazing about this. So number one, we saw what's called a 1052 millibar high. That's really incredibly strong high pressure. It was sitting on the north slope of Alaska, and we knew the Greenland block was there. So it looked like that high, instead of heading east, like toward the Hudson Bay in Greenland, it was going to be forced into the U.S. So there's the cold air, right? At the same time, for those of us that follow 500 millibars, that's about 18,000 feet, we saw a 594 millibar high building over basically their Sargasso Sea, which is right south of Bermuda toward Puerto Rico. And the reason that's significant is that in a very unusual situation, it shot the subtropical jet stream from Central America up toward the western Gulf of Mexico and Texas. So what? Well, that's a ton of moisture. Yes. We really first saw a hint, and I know Lou knows this, folks. I'm just sharing this with you. We saw the first hint of how much, I almost used that F consonant. We saw so much moisture in the atmosphere, as evidenced by the front that came through, and we had 2 to 4 inches of rain. Right. Black Creek. I mean, that showed how much moisture. But that pump from the subtropical jet stream was still there. So in many ways, what happened over the last 24 hours, I would say, think of it as literally we had ingredients that came from the north slope of Alaska and from Central America. And there's your Yahtzee.
That's Yahtzee.
That's your Yahtzee.
And you get cyclogenesis with that.
Right.
A great way to create low pressure out of the Gulf of Mexico when you get that going. So I've learned. I feel like every day you got to learn a little something, and the upside down omega block. Interesting stuff. All right, Tim, thank you. I'm seeing no more questions. I do want to. Can we leave one more time with a 7-day thought?
Yes, let's do it.
People have generally been asking, Lewis, etc. When will we have consecutive days of 70 degrees? For heaven's sakes, it's time to thaw out. I can't make any promises. You look far out in the 7-day. I know a lot of times, you deal with climatology in certain forecasting models. You get into longer ranges, and it'll tend to pull high temperatures up a bit, or low temperatures up too. But just maybe, we'll see a thaw, or at least a little something pleasant deep in the 7-day.
So I'll add to that. To see. So think about this. As Lou alluded to, once you get to climatology, in my opinion, that's just beyond 7 days. Some say that's beyond 30 days.
Sure.
But there's 90-day outlooks. And because of discussion about La Nina and El Nino, if you look at the 7-day outlook, not just for Jacksonville, but for the whole Southeast, it showed December, January, and February drier than normal and warmer than normal. Well, December was warmer barely after the cold start, but even warmer than normal. Was still wet. January was definitely wet and colder than normal, right? So I think one of two things is going to happen. Either we have February come and go, and that outlook was just out the door wrong, right? Have to admit.
Right.
Or if in March we look back and say it was right, the only way it's going to be right is then if February is amazingly dry and record heat. So let's see what happens.
Not sure if I'm rooting for that necessarily, just for fire risks in the deep, dark, long-term picture. But at the same time, we've had a lot, January that we deserve a little break, right? And I know some people want to do some ocean research and maybe try to catch a fish.
And and maybe chase the kids and grandkids outside.
100%.
Yeah.
All right, Tim. Well, thank you very much. I know we'll be back, as needed here, but of course we'll be broadcasting at noon as well.
What I continue to learn, folks, I have to add is how Lou does it. He's been here since 1 in the morning, and Smooth Lou, he just
dear.
continues, just
You
no
know
chop.
what it is? How many times?
No chop.
How many times? How many times do I run go get coffee during the morning shift? It's 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, but when I do that, I start, there's chop.
Oh, there's a little
Yeah.
moderate chop. It's never anything rough. Nothing that the skiff can't handle. All right, y'all, be safe. Have a great day.